Hello, viewers. It's time for me to finish up my wine yeast experiments. This is part 2. So I'm going to test this Red Star Premier Classique and the Red Star Premier Blanc. And I'll test not adding any additional yeast. So please see my previous video, part 1, for the results of brewing with 3 other wine yeasts. So I was inspired to do these 2 videos by this sampler pack of yeasts with 5 different kinds. So I'm going to follow exactly the same recipe as the previous video. I'll start off with putting my Nuruk in the sun. So this is going to be a single stage makgeolli, a Danyangju. So I'll just go through this quickly. Wash the rice, rinse it, wash and rinse, and soak the rice for at least 3 hours. Then drain it and rinse it one more time. Let it drain for 30 minutes and then steam it for 40 minutes. While the rice is steaming, I'm preparing the Nuruk in each cup here. 90 grams of Nuruk, 200 milliliters of water. In cup A, no additional yeast. In cup B, Premier Blanc yeast. And here's the description for Premier Blanc. It's Saccharomyces baianus. It has a high alcohol tolerance. And cup C is going to be Premier Classique. And here's the description for Premier Classique. It has a fairly high alcohol tolerance as well. And it's Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So two different species of yeast here. Let's see how this is going to turn out differently. Okay, so now the rice is done. Spread it out to cool to room temperature. And then I'm going to divide it evenly among my 3 jars. Jar A, B, and C. And I labeled the cups A, B, and C as well, so I wouldn't get them confused. And adding 800 milliliters of water. And each jar gets that cup of Nuruk mixture and the additional water. Mix it by hand. And notice the yeast has really bubbled nicely. So it started bubbling and reproducing. So that's great. It's a little warmer. It's about 25 degrees Celsius. I think the relatively high temperature is going to be good for jar A in particular, getting the fermentation started. Next day, day 1, I hear all 3 bubbling, and I'm going to stir each of them twice a day for the first 2 days. And on day 2, you really can see the liquid collecting at the bottom. So they're all fermenting, but they are fermenting differently. And since it's continuing to be hot, I'm going to put it in the basement where it's about 20 degrees Celsius. That's going to be a little better for the rest of the fermentation time, I think. So what you can see day by day as the fermentation progresses, well, jar A has, the level is higher than jar B. That means there's more bubbles of gas in jar A. But it also looks like the fermentation has progressed faster in jar B. There's already more rice that's falling down to the bottom, and that middle layer of liquid is actually getting smaller day by day. Yeah, so jar A is the slowest in fermentation, jar C is next, and jar B is the fastest. And by day 9, jar B looks very uniform, and it's definitely done. So I'm going to bottle on day 9 just for consistency, for comparison, but I think A and C could have fermented more days. So it's time to boil my filter bag and start filtering. Again, all 3 of these, got to do it the same. And I'll give you all the jjigae measurements at the end. All 3 of these were pretty easy to filter. I want to mention this. I'm following this method where I get an extra cup of makgeolli out of the brew. I do that by taking the jjigae, adding 150 milliliters of water, and really squishing it around and squeezing it again with the additional water. And that lets me extract this 1 extra cup of makgeolli out of each of these jars. So actually I get 2 measurements for the jjigae after this. So by doing this, I get this extra cup, and it's a good tasting makgeolli, but it's something that I have to consume fresh. So that's sort of the bonus for the brewer, that additional cup that I get from adding water to the jjigae. But what that means is that I actually have 2 measurements, 2 weights of the jjigae. The original weight, and then after the second squeezing, it'll be, the jjigae will weigh even less. These are the numbers I got for jar A. After initial squeezing, 275. After squeezing the second time, it was 215. For B, it was 223 down to 193. And for C, it was 241 down to 209. So just by these measurements, you still see that jar B fermented the most completely. Interesting result. Of course, that Premier Blanc is the wine yeast that I normally use, and it turns out to be the one that ferments the fastest and most complete during this time period. So I'm going to drink these 3 cups of the bonus cups right now, but I'm going to do the real tasting 4 days later. Hello, viewers. It's been 4 days since I bottled, and you can see how much this brew has settled. So here's A, and take a look at B. So, and here's C. So right away you notice that B has settled a lot more. The level of sediment is lower. There's more clear liquid, and the clear liquid is more clear in B than in A or C. Especially A, it's pretty cloudy compared with B. So that's an interesting effect of the yeast. So the B is Premier Blanc, and it seems like Premier Blanc is good for really complete fermentation and getting the most chongju out of a brew. Seems like the Premier Blanc yeast is the best for that out of all the yeasts I've tried here. But we also want to taste this, so let's pour this. I'm going to open this carefully and pour. So start with A. It does feel like there's quite a bit of carbonation in here. Okay, not too bad, but this is going. Okay, so that's, you can see how quick you have to react. I'm going to mix all 3 of these and then get back to you. Okay, so first I'm going to taste A and B. A has no additional yeast. B has the Premier Blanc yeast that I usually use. So this should be, so B is the baseline of comparison. Is what I'm used to. So yeah, it has the aroma. Okay, so A has a more sour aroma. Okay, so so this matches what I expect. A is more sour. Taste it; it's fairly tart. It does have what I suspect is a more authentic flavor. So that's sort of the trade-off. A is more sour, but has more authentic flavor overall. B fermented better, and I get a clearer Chongju and more of it, but the taste is less authentic. Mainly because it's drier, less sour. It's easier to taste the lactic acid, though. So this is so there are trade-offs, and usually for consistency, this is the yeast I use. Okay, but I especially want to compare B with C. So C had the Premier Classique yeast. Okay, there's less of an aroma overall. These have about the same aroma, but C is more sour. Not as sour as A, but more sour than B. The taste is pretty sharp. And with B, I don't know if it's because the fermentation is more complete or it's just drier and less sweet and less sour. It's easier to taste the other elements of makgeolli, including the milkiness, the lactic acid taste. So I still like B overall, and I can see why the Premier Blanc yeast is a recommended yeast to use for brewing, because out of all 5 yeasts that I tried, it did ferment the fastest and the most. It was the most complete fermentation out of all of them, including using only the yeast already present in the Nuruk. Okay, so this is a good illustration of why this yeast is preferred, and it also gives a good taste. It lets the other characteristic elements of makgeolli stand out, so you don't just get a blast of sourness. So I appreciate that. I do realize it's less authentic to add this wine yeast to makgeolli. That's just something else to consider. But try out different yeasts, see what works for you. I hope this experiment with these 6 brews in this video and the previous video help you out and encourage you to brew more and experiment more with yeast. Thank you for watching.